Many people are unaware of a subtle, almost hidden behavior that strongly influences modern relationships. The urge to constantly explain oneself. At first glance, this habit appears harmless, even courteous. Offering reasons for one's choices, feelings, absences, or mood shifts may seem like empathy or thoughtfulness. Yet beneath this continual self-justification lies something far more profound and troubling, a psychological wound that has not fully healed. Do you often feel like you have to explain your choices just to be accepted? Comment 1 if you recognize this habit in yourself. Comment 2 if you've noticed it more in others than in your own life. Carl Gustav Jung, a leading figure in analytical psychology, recognized this tendency as a clear sign of being disconnected from one's inner self. To him, the constant effort to persuade others of one's identity, feelings, and actions reflects a neglect of the self. People who endlessly justify themselves are often searching for something denied to them, permission to simply exist. This behavior usually develops in emotionally invalidating environments, often within families, where a child's subjective experience is repeatedly dismissed. That's nonsense. You're overreacting. There's no reason to feel that way. The internalized lesson is harsh. My feelings only matter if others acknowledge, approve, or permit them. With time, this belief becomes an unseen prison, trapping the person in dependence on external validation to confirm their inner reality. Thus, when an adult habitually explains themselves, it is often an unconscious attempt to ward off abandonment, criticism, or rejection. They convince themselves that if others understand their motives, then criticism, distance, or rejection can be avoided. This is a desperate attempt to control how they are perceived in order to secure belonging and emotional safety. Yet such constant effort extracts a heavy toll, the sacrifice of psychological autonomy. By seeking external validation, the person abandons their own inner authority. Their actions are no longer rooted in personal conviction, but in the need to justify themselves to prevent misunderstanding. Their emotions cease to flow freely. Instead, they are rationalized to avoid negative judgment. Slowly, they stop living authentically for themselves and instead perform for others. In a theater where the audience holds more power than the actor. Jung saw this dynamic as a major barrier to individuation, the journey of becoming one's true self. The reality is sobering. As long as the urge to explain persists, inner freedom remains out of reach. Compulsive explanation is, in essence, a refined form of submission. Each justification silently communicates, I can only exist if you permit me. This discussion serves as an invitation to break free from such conditioning, a deeper exploration of why countless people remain trapped in the compulsion to justify themselves, and what shifts when they finally embrace silence. Once they stop explaining, a profound transformation occurs. The psyche, once bowed under the weight of external approval, begins to stand upright with newfound authority from within, and this changes everything. The drive to constantly explain oneself is rooted in something far deeper than politeness or a wish to be understood. It stems from a psychological wound embedded at the very center of identity. Jung recognized that this compulsion is not a mere behavioral tendency, but a symptom, a manifestation of a much older unconscious belief that one's existence only carries worth when confirmed by others. This wound typically takes root in childhood, within settings where a child's subjective experience is persistently denied. A child who expresses sadness and is told they are being dramatic, who shows anger and is labeled difficult or disrespectful, or who admits fear only to be met with mockery or scorn, begins to absorb a harmful lesson. My feelings are wrong. I can only rely on others to tell me what is real. Gradually, the child creates a defense mechanism, believing that safety lies in being understood. They discover that if they explain their feelings thoroughly, they may avoid punishment, dismissal, or ridicule. This sets in motion a lifelong pattern, carried into adulthood, where every feeling, choice, and behavior is justified as though one needs a valid argument just to have the right to exist and feel. At the core of this wound lies the loss of inner authority. The individual no longer perceives their experience as inherently valid, but instead depends on the judgment of others to confirm whether their feelings and actions are legitimate. This dynamic fosters a psychological condition of submission, where self-worth is constructed not from within, but from the mirror of others' perceptions. Crucially, this process unfolds unconsciously. Many who are caught in this cycle remain unaware that they are continually seeking to persuade others of the reasonableness of their emotions, the logic of their decisions, and the legitimacy of their actions. Yet, behind each justification lurks a hidden fear, the fear of being rejected simply for existing as they are. Jung argued that every person must eventually confront this inherited inner framework. Until that confrontation takes place, individuals continue to live according to the values, judgments, and expectations of others, most often those internalized from childhood. Authority figures, like parents, teachers, or religious leaders. The person thus becomes a mirror of what others find acceptable, rather than an authentic expression of themselves. In this way, compulsive self-explanation becomes an act of self-abandonment, betraying one's own truth in order to make it more acceptable to others. Have you ever caught yourself living more for others' approval than for your own truth? Comment 1. If you felt pressured to act for acceptance. Comment 2. If you've managed to stay true, even when misunderstood. True healing begins at the moment one recognizes that permission to exist is unnecessary, and that emotions, however intense, contradictory, or unusual, require no justification to be valid and to deserve space. Yet this awakening is not without suffering. When a person resists the impulse to justify themselves, the silence that emerges can feel unsettling, exposing the void left by the lack of a firmly established inner authority. This is exactly what Jung addresses when presenting one of the foundations of his psychology, the building of internal authority. In the following section, we will explore how this principle, essential to the Jungian path of individuation, can fundamentally reshape the way a person relates to the world. What does it truly mean to develop inner authority? And why does it hold the key to ending the cycle of compulsive self-explanation? If this material resonates with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your support. Compulsive self-explanation is more than a defense mechanism. It is a constant act of self-betrayal, a quiet, almost invisible betrayal, yet profoundly destructive. Jung recognized that whenever a person adjusts their words to avoid upsetting others, conceals their emotions to maintain harmony, or suppresses their decisions to escape judgment, they are in fact moving further away from themselves. What truly occurs is the abandonment of one's own truth. This betrayal of the self is not dramatic or sudden, but rather slow, subtle, and continuous. It happens when you laugh at jokes you don't find amusing just to appear friendly, when you agree to something while inwardly wanting to refuse to avoid seeming selfish, when you disguise sadness as tiredness so as not to burden others, or when you suppress anger under the guise of rationality, fearing to appear immature. With every small compromise made for the sake of acceptance, a fragment of the soul is lost. Jung explained that such behavior reflects an ego cut off from the self. Instead of serving the functional center of consciousness, the ego becomes enslaved to external approval. It reshapes itself endlessly to match what others expect to see. In this cycle of adaptation, the individual drifts further from their true self. They cease to trust their intuition, doubt their emotions, and question their most genuine motivations. Where inner confidence should reside, doubt takes root. This gradual self-abandonment is particularly harmful because society often rewards it. Those who adapt easily, explain themselves smoothly, avoid conflict, and are agreeable tend to receive praise. Yet behind this facade of harmony lies profound emotional fatigue, the exhaustion of living for others while losing the ability to listen to oneself. Jung argued that such inner fragmentation is a primary cause of neuroses. When the ego strays too far from the self, the symbolic center of psychological wholeness, symptoms inevitably appear. Chronic anxiety, existential crises, feelings of emptiness, indecision, and low self-esteem. Why? Because the soul is crying out to be heard, yet it has been muted in favor of social conformity. At the heart of this issue lies a fundamental question. Whose life are you living? If you are always seeking approval for your feelings, thoughts, or actions, then your life becomes little more than a performance, an edited version of your truth. You remain a character in someone else's script, never the true author of your own story. The sole path to breaking free from this cycle of self-betrayal is by reclaiming inner authority. It requires cultivating the ability to stand by your truth, even when it is misunderstood, uncomfortable, or contrary to others' expectations. This marks the beginning of genuine individuation, becoming whole, even if doing so leads to disappointing others. But how does one cultivate inner authority? How can you stop depending on others' understanding to validate your identity? How can you remain silent when pressured to explain? These are the very questions Jung addresses through his concept of individuation. This will be examined more deeply in the next section, for it is only with this authority that silence stops being absence and becomes affirmation. For Jung, real psychological freedom does not come from social approval or external comprehension, but from developing inner authority. This principle, at the core of his theory of individuation, reflects the individual's capacity to affirm their own subjective experience without depending on others' validation. It is the turning point where one stops asking, will they understand my feelings? And instead declares, it doesn't matter if they understand this is true for me. Internal authority directly opposes compulsive self-explanation, whereas the latter stems from insecurity and the need to justify every action for acceptance. Inner authority is rooted in the profound conviction that one's truth does not require negotiation. This transformation is not just intellectual, it is existential. It represents a shift of the psyche's center of gravity, moving away from the periphery of external approval and back to the self, where the fullness of being resides. This transition, however, is not easy. It demands courage. By refusing to explain themselves, individuals must face the fear of abandonment, criticism, and exclusion head-on. Jung taught that individuation requires crossing the desert of inner solitude, the moment when you can say no without guilt, change your mind without justification, or end a conversation without explanation, not from arrogance, but from the simple recognition that you owe no one proof of your existence. Building this inner authority does not imply becoming detached or unwilling to engage in dialogue. Instead, it means no longer pleading for validation. You share your truth as a gift, not as a request for approval. Communication stops being a performance and becomes genuine expression. It shifts from speaking for acceptance to speaking from authenticity. In practice, internal authority shows itself in small daily actions, in silence when provoked, in the calm assertion of, this doesn't resonate with me, without needing justification, in the refusal to play emotional games of constant self-defense, and above all, in the strength to withstand being misunderstood while remaining intact. Jung regarded this stage as one of the most crucial in psychological development, the moment when a person ceases to outsource their self-worth and starts to recognize it as an inner source. This shift is both symbolic and transformative, signaling a rupture with the conditioned self that exists to please others and the emergence of a new self that is grounded, independent, and complete. Yet, this new posture is not universally welcomed. In fact, the silence born of inner authority often unsettles others. Those who once thrived on your insecurity lose their grip. Manipulators feel endangered. Power-based relationships begin to collapse. This is precisely why everything shifts once you stop explaining yourself. In the following section, we will explore this pivotal transformation. Why does silence carry such immense power? What shifts occur in your relationships when you no longer justify your existence? Prepare yourself. What comes next may deeply alter how you see the connections you hold today. Do you think silence can actually strengthen your relationships rather than weaken them? Comment 1 if you've experienced silence as empowering. Comment 2 if silence has felt more uncomfortable than liberating. Silence, when born of integrity rather than avoidance, is among the most transformative powers of the human mind. Jung grasped this with striking clarity, perceiving silence not as a void of response, but as an embodiment of authority. When a person ceases the habit of compulsive self-justification, they are not merely sidestepping conflict or ending dialogue. They are dismantling an entire system of psychological control sustained by their insecurity. Such silence is unsettling. To those who always expected submission, self-explanation, or correction, The absence of justification feels like rebellion, and indeed it is, but not the loud, immature form that demands attention. It is a quiet revolution, a tacit declaration. I owe no explanations for being myself. Manipulators who thrive on others' uncertainty start losing ground. Emotional manipulation only functions when it detects vulnerability, fear of being misunderstood, rejected, or of disappointing others. Manipulation survives on reactivity. Yet, the steady silence that arises from inner authority is like a stone wall. It neither reacts, nor justifies, nor plays along. It simply exists, and this presence unsettles any effort to dominate. Additionally, relationships that have long relied on your submission, whether emotional, intellectual, or behavioral, begin to expose their true nature, fragile, unequal, and imbalanced. By refusing to justify yourself, you dissolve the hidden agreement of inferiority. You no longer see yourself as someone needing acceptance, but as someone who already embraces themselves. This shift changes everything. Some people will pull away, and this is not a mistake, but a realignment. Your silence becomes a filter, showing who stayed out of true connection and who stayed merely because you were easy to control. Jung affirmed that individuation often involves breakages. Such distancing is not punishment, it is liberation. Once you stop justifying your existence, your limits, and your choices, you begin to draw relationships grounded in mutual respect rather than fear or dependency. Yet, you must be ready for this. For when you stop explaining yourself, you must also face your own anxiety. The part of you conditioned for years to equate being understood with having worth will resist. It will urge you to justify again, to reconsider, to explain, just this time. At this point, silence becomes a spiritual discipline, a deliberate act of staying whole despite unease. Thus, silence is not merely the lack of words, but the affirmation of existence itself. It is the refusal to place your identity under scrutiny. The longer you uphold this silence, the more it evolves into presence, a presence radiating authority, one that inspires respect without loudness, sets boundaries without conflict, and exists without requiring approval. Yet, the influence of silence extends beyond external relationships. It sparks a deep inner process, integration. When you no longer justify yourself, you finally start listening to your own voice. When you stop over-explaining your feelings, you allow yourself to truly experience them. That is the gateway to genuine transformation. Silence on the outside creates room for inner listening. In the next section, we will explore this crucial turning point, how the authority you project outward originates from an inner shift, the return to psychological integrity. You will see why integrated individuals do not persuade. They simply communicate. And why, once you embody this stance, the world's way of treating you changes entirely. There is a magnetic quality in someone who has no urge to justify themselves. It is something that cannot be imitated or forced. It is psychological integrity. This is the condition of a person who refuses to compromise their essence just to meet outside demands. Jung viewed this integrity as one of the highest expressions of individuation. When a person not only recognizes their truth, but stands by it, without doubt, without guilt, and most importantly, without needing external approval. A person who is integrated does not plead for understanding. They speak, they express, but they do not try to persuade. This is because they do not assume they must justify their existence. Their words stem from a stable core, not from inner emptiness. How others perceive them. The world gives greater respect to those who respect themselves. And true self-respect starts when you refuse to bargain away what is essential within you. Psychological integrity is not the same as rigidity. It is coherence. It is the capacity to hold firm to an inner line of truth despite outside pressures. It is when you sense unease in a situation, and even without logical justification, you trust that feeling. You need not offer proof or construct detailed arguments. You simply affirm, "This does not resonate with me," and that alone suffices. This approach, though it may appear simple, is revolutionary in a world where most people live detached from themselves, where choices are dictated by others' opinions, where emotions are suppressed to avoid looking overly sensitive, and where boundaries are crossed behind polite smiles to avoid seeming difficult. Integrity is the very opposite. It is the practice of being whole, of not breaking yourself apart to please, of not hiding to prevent conflict. Jung understood that true transformation does not come from learning more theories, but from adopting a new way of living. And this begins with refusing to justify yourself, since every compulsive explanation hides an underlying insecurity. Am I enough? An integrated person no longer poses this question. They know they are sufficient even when the world suggests otherwise. Here lies the paradox. The less you chase approval, the more respect you naturally command. Integrity carries weight, density, presence. This is why a centered individual can shift the atmosphere of a room without uttering a word. They have nothing to prove. Their inner coherence speaks for them. Such people do not plead for a place. They claim it. They do not act from insecurity, but from alignment. Yet, there is one crucial point. Integrity becomes possible only when you stop betraying yourself, when you cease reshaping who you are to be accepted, when you allow yourself to feel, choose, and act even if no one comprehends. This demands practice, presence, and self-awareness. Above all, it requires the courage to take full responsibility for your own life, without blaming others and without outsourcing your worth. Once integrity takes root, its impact is profound. Your relationships transform, your professional stance evolves, your self-image becomes sharper, anxiety lessens, the urge to manage others' perceptions fades, because you stop living for others' understanding and begin living for your own truth. Yet something deeper unfolds, not just in how you interact with the world, but in the energy you radiate. When you stop justifying yourself, you emit a new frequency, the presence of someone in self-mastery. Everyone around senses this unconsciously. Visible transformation happens. the world begins to regard you as someone who cannot be negotiated away. In the final section, we will explore how this psychological integrity reshapes your connection with the outside world. How, without uttering a word, you begin to receive respect in ways that once seemed unreachable. And why, when you cease explaining yourself, the world completely shifts in how it reacts to your presence. When someone stops justifying themselves, everything transforms, internally and externally. It is as if a new vibration is released. You no longer plead, "Please understand me." Instead, your presence declares, "I know who I am, and I do not need your permission." And inevitably, the world responds. Jung understood that the human psyche is directed by energy, presence, and inner structure, not by rational explanations. The one who always seeks to be understood radiates submission and uncertainty. The one who ceases to justify themselves radiates strength, clarity, and authority. This is not arrogance. It is wholeness. People begin to hear you in a new way. Unequal relationships lose their validity. Situations where you were submissive, predictable, and easily manipulated fall apart, not through conflict, but because you are no longer willing to play that part. Silence reshapes the structure of your relationships, for it expresses what you once pleaded for. It declares, "I am not here to be molded. I am here to exist." From that moment, you start attracting a new kind of connection, deeper, more sincere, more in tune with who you truly are. Respect begins within and flows outward. The first step is to stop justifying your very existence. Yet, this path requires awareness, because in moments of uncertainty, the urge to explain will return. Pleasing will feel safer. Yielding will feel easier. And it is in these moments that you must recall. Each time you silence the impulse to explain, you reaffirm yourself. You strengthen your integrity. You claim your place in the world, not as one pleading for space, but as one who already knows they belong. This shift does not only alter how others perceive you, it redefines how you perceive life itself. Once you stop justifying your emotions, choices, and existence, a new clarity emerges. The recognition that life is not a courtroom where every action must be defended. Instead, it is a journey of expression, discovery, and becoming. Without the constant weight of explanation, energy once wasted on managing perceptions is redirected toward creation, growth, and presence. Relationships become more authentic, decisions more aligned, and the self more grounded. Jung insisted that individuation is not about isolation, but about connection from a place of wholeness. In this sense, refusing to justify yourself is not withdrawal from others, but the very condition for genuine connection. For only when you stand rooted in your own truth can you truly meet another, not as a reflection of their expectations, but as a whole being. This is the paradox. Silence does not diminish dialogue, but enriches it, because it arises from strength rather than fear. And in this way, what begins as an act of inner resistance transforms into a new way of inhabiting the world with presence, integrity, and freedom. What about you? Have you ever broken the cycle of over-explaining? Comment 1 if you are actively learning to stand in silence. Comment 2 if you still feel pulled toward justifying yourself. Now, share in the comments. What is the explanation you find yourself repeating most, but deep down you already know you no longer wish to give? Perhaps it concerns your emotions, your boundaries, or your way of being. Write it down. This is more than mere venting. It is a turning point. And if this message challenged or inspired you, don't keep it private. Like the video, share it with others who over-explain, and subscribe to the channel. The next video is a vital step on this journey. Watch it. You'll see why.